getting a testimony tonight.
Yeah.
Woo woo. All right. So with that, we have Patty, who's coming here all the way here from Holland.
Yeah.
So let's give her a warm welcome.
Let me just move in really fast. Well, my name is Patty, and I am a growing and grateful believer in Jesus. And I am celebrating some victory over trauma and anxiety and still working on issues of codependency and control issues.
Okay.
I am thankful to be here. I generally get to interact with the CR in Holland at Central Wesleyan Church. That's the church where I actually serve on staff, which is kind of only by the grace of God alone, and we'll get to more of that in a minute. But my very first memory starts when on my 5th birthday, and I remember waking up and going into my mom and my stepdad's room and going, Mom, I'm 5. Like, I just remember that so vividly. And the next memory of that same day that I have shortly after that was hiding under the dining room table because there was a whole bunch of grown-ups in my house that I did not know. One of them was my biological father, who I saw about once every couple of years, and they were there to celebrate my birthday, and everybody else was excited about it except for me, because everybody else felt unfamiliar and scary to me. And I remember my mom making me get in the car with them and go to an ice cream shop, and I was like, what is happening? I don't want to do this. I just remember wanting to go back home. But that was our family at the time. It was my mom, my stepdad, my half-brother, and I. We had a cat named Charlie. It was just the 4 of us and the cat. My mom stayed home. She loved to sew. She loved to cook. She loved soap operas. She also really loved rum and Diet Coke. My brother and I walked to school. We walked home. We had neighborhood friends. We even had, legitimately, you guys, like a little white picket fence. Like, it sounds so great, right? Everything was safe. Christmas, everyone would come to our house, we would celebrate together. I remember people coming in and sleeping in all sorts of rooms on couches. It was wonderful. When I was about 7, my stepdad came home from work one day and said, you know what? And had been going to church kind of on again, off again, on his own without the rest of us. He decided to quit his job and enroll in art school because he felt like that's what God called him to do. Okay, there our family fell apart. My mom was angry. She relied very heavily on her favorite drink, and now she started her day with boxed wine and then continued her day with rum and Coke. They ended up getting a divorce, and my mom and my brother and I stayed in our little home, and my mom got a third shift job. She managed to make it work. My stepdad, my brother's dad, moved to an apartment in Granville, and soon after that, mandatory visits started. And just like when I was under the dining room table, I was in the back seat of my stepdad's car thinking, I do not want to be here. I do not want to go. Here I am sitting in the back seat of this car. I have no choice. So my mom got this third shift factory job, and that's where she met a man. And that was kind of fun, like some stability it seemed like. He was gonna let us off. He offered for us all to move in with him in his trailer nearby. And Mom couldn't keep up with the rent of the house we were in on her hourly job, so we moved. Right away, he showed us discipline, he showed us the paddle, he showed us the things that he was going to use to keep us in line. We knew not to miss a move. No food, no drinks without asking, no touching anything unless it was in your room. Mom and he were both heavy all-day drinkers. Mom eventually stopped working at the factory and started working at a different place in the kitchen. My brother and I rode the bus to school. We would get ourselves off to school each day. We'd go home, nobody was there, but we just assumed they were all still working. But we learned quickly that that wasn't the case. They ended their shifts and went to local bars. I had just started 5th grade, so that makes me 10-ish, when all of the abuse started, and my brother and I shared a room with bunk beds made of plywood that this man my mom was dating had built, and we could hear the fighting loud and clear. Trailer walls are not very thick. So I would crawl out of bed into the hall, and if my brother woke up, I would tuck him back in, make sure he was safe, and I would lock the door before crawling back out into the hallway. I don't know what my threshold was until I decided to dash into the living room, because there was only, phones on a dock at that point, and call 911. And I would say, "Come help fast. He's hurting my mom." Soon the police would come, and depending on the night, a variety of things would happen. They would calm them down, and they would leave, and we'd all go back to bed, and would start over the next day. Or they would arrest my mom, or they would arrest him, or they would arrest both of them, and we would go to the neighbor's house across the street. And I don't remember the names of those neighbors that were across the street. I just know that they were a family of 4, a husband, a wife, a son, and a daughter. And every time we spent the night there, the next morning, she always had banana bread with butter on it. It's just funny the things that your brain remembers. And it happened over and over again. The physical abuse to my brother and I looked different than what happened to my mom. I had just gone into now 6th grade, so it's been about a year, and first year in middle school, it's picture day. You're all concerned about flyaways and want your hair to look nice. Nobody else is home, and so I snuck into the bathroom in the back of the trailer to use my mom's hairspray. So no one's home. How are they gonna know? I'm just gonna use a little bit of hairspray. No one's gonna know. I got home and he knew that I had used the hairspray. I still don't know how. And so though my punishment wasn't physical abuse at that point, instead he took my ponytail and cut my hair off. And as a 6th grader who had just gotten back from picture day with his long hair with a homemade pixie cut, I was like, I'm done. I would love to never have to deal with this again. And by that fall, Halloween had come, and we were getting ready to go trick-or-treating around this trailer park with our friends, and we had pillowcases of candy, but still I just wanted to go anywhere, be anywhere but there, and I certainly did not want to be with my stepdad either, but I had no place to go. So I got home that Halloween. I dumped out my candy on our little trailer floor. My brother and I are trading candy, and I got a little book. And I knew I had gotten that book from the lady across the street, and I opened it. It was talking about God and salvation. And at this point, I had been going to church every weekend with my stepdad. So I'd been learning about God. I had this idea of who he was. My aunt was Catholic, so I'd been to Mass, like all these different things. But I knew in my heart, in that moment of darkness, that my only way out, the only thing that I had to cling to in that moment was this God I barely knew. And so on that floor, as a 10, 11-year-old, I prayed a little salvation prayer. And I know without a doubt that is exactly when the Lord saved me. And at this point, the every other weekend trips to my brother's dad were kind of like a vacation, though I didn't want to be there. I'd get there and I would call my mom's sister and say, "Aunt Dana, we're here. Can we come to your house instead?" And she was gracious, and every other weekend she said, "Yes, you can come." And so we'd go to her house and we'd have hot dogs and mac and cheese. She kept everything consistent for us. And so we'd spend the whole Saturday there. And then Sunday we would drive back to Holland, we would go to church. And then Sunday afternoon, we were dropped off at home again. This went on and on eventually until there's always one last 911 call. And my mom rode away in an ambulance. He went to jail. We went to our neighbor's house. And the next day we got off the bus, because that's just what you do. Your mom goes to the hospital, your stepdad goes to jail, you get on the bus and go to school the next day. And I walked into the trailer and my mom was there and she said we were moving. So my brother and I packed up our things and we moved to a bottom floor of a duplex in Zeeland. And I knew it was not far enough away. I knew despite my mom's promises, he would be back. My mom continued drinking, working, and now bringing many men home regularly. Some would stay a week, some would stay a night. Somewhere between 6th and 7th grade, my brother and I started spending summers at our grandmother's house in Pennsylvania. This is my mom's mom. And she would drive us down, we would stay for 8 weeks, and it was truly our first taste of a safe and consistent home. Grandma loved us so much. It was lunch and dinner and snacks. I remember asking her if I could have a glass of milk, and she was like, "Why are you even asking me?" And I was like, "I thought I had to." We didn't have to ask. Freedom to play with our friends, to run around this little town in Pennsylvania and make our summer friends. She bought us our school supplies, our clothes, our shoes, brought us to the fair. Those weeks went by so fast. And then it was time to go back to Michigan, and the next year was the same. Somewhere between 7th and 8th grade, we went back to Pennsylvania, and it was the best. At this point, my way of coping with trauma and abuse and everything that was going on was, I'm going to graduate from high school and I'm going to move into the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, and I'm going to go to the smallest school I can find because that's where happiness is. And self-harm. But I knew how to hide it. Nobody else knew. I was resilient. I was a great helper to all. No one knew my battle. When Grandma drove us to Ohio to meet Mom to bring us back home that summer, Mom didn't show up. Grandma drove us the rest of the way home, and she got a hotel and went to drop us off at home, and Mom was drunk and wouldn't let her stay because, of course, it was Grandma's fault. So Grandma drove back to Pennsylvania. What else was she to do? And we were back to our normal. Mom, stepdad, they bought some property a little ways away, so every weekend we went and stayed at this property. Mom and he had a makeshift bedroom in a pole barn, and my brother and I would sleep in the back of the car. And then again, the final weekend before everything changed again. I knew it was going to be a bad one. After so many years, you can start to predict when one's coming. And we saw the signs, and so my brother and I were just keeping our heads down. We were going to try and sleep in the back of the car. The seats were down. We're just going to lay there, be quiet, don't say anything. We tried to sleep, but we heard the screaming, we saw it happening, and my brother ran out of the car. And so I, of course, ran out of the car after him. And soon, Mom got away, we all jumped back in the car. She was very drunk, and I knew she shouldn't drive. And I knew we were not safe. The seats are down, there's no seatbelts, it's the middle of the night. And I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed the whole way until we got back to our home. I prayed that God would get us there safe, and he did. It's actually a miracle because not only was she incredibly drunk, but she'd taken an entire bottle of ibuprofen from the time she got in the car in the 30-minute drive. I called 911 to save my mom from herself that night. And I don't remember who took us where. I know I was at school the next day. How I was at school the next day, I don't know. But I was. We got off the bus, I walk home, whatever, we get home and Mom is there. She feels terrible, of course. She apologizes, promises to never take him back. And for a few weeks, it seems great, but we could manage. We could manage Mom being drunk. That was totally fine. If he wasn't there, we could manage that. That is fine. That's also the first time she sat us down and told us what not to say to CBS unless we ever wanted to not see her again. So a few months later, he's still out of the picture, and I got to have my first sleepover ever. So I'm about 13 at this point, and my friend who lived across the street from us was coming over to stay the night, and I was so excited. I had never had anything like that before. And it was all fun and games until about 2. Mom was super drunk, and she was hallucinating, and so she came into my bedroom, and she started screaming at my friend and I to get out of the house. Leave, leave, I don't know who she thought we were. So my friend, myself, grabbed my little brother, and we ran to her house. We're banging on the door. They finally let us in, and of course, call 911. Mom got to stay home that night, but when I got back from school that day, I walked in the house, and this is, funny trauma responses when you look back at things, right? And there was a breathalyzer kit that a police officer had left at our house. So a logical thing for me to do was pick that up and walk it back to the police station and return it. By the way, you left this at my house. I just thought I'd return it. And so that's what I did. And then a few days later, I'm sitting in 8th grade social studies, and there's a little knock on the door, and there's a school staff person, and it's my brother's dad is with him, and he says, by the way, your mom tried to kill herself in a bathroom, so you're coming to live with me now. Okay, again, what choice do I have in this situation? Here we go. So we had a trash bag of my things, and that was the end. Eventually, my mom lost custody and was in jail. My brother's dad only really wanted him because he was his kid. I was not. But the court said, sorry, it's 2 for 1. You get both or none. And so he decided he would take both of us. So he, who was newly married, both on their second marriage with their own baggage, took in a teenager and an elementary age student with all kinds of baggage and drama. It was not the ideal situation. So that all kind of happened, and I was not the most lovely teenager to live with. I recognize that now. But all of us with all of our baggage, and no one knew how to process There was so much happening, and at one point I said, I'm running away, and I ran out, and they locked the door behind me. And we were like, all right, we all feel comfortable with this situation. And so I couch surfed for a while, and about a week later, I was working at a little store in town, and my family tree is complex. See if you can follow the line. So my brother's dad, his wife's brother-in-law, so my step-uncle, I think is what it would be, shows up at my job with a trash bag of my things and says, you're living with us now. Okay, sounds like a plan. Again, what options do I have? So Dean and Mary love me and still love me like their own. They had 3 boys who were older than me, so they were excited to call me their daughter. They let me finish out my junior year at high school, and at the high school I was in, and then moving to a small private school in Holland. It was a safe environment. It was consistent. No survival, no abuse, but no brother. I thrived and he thrived. After keeping each other safe for years, we could finally be kids. I was able to meet the God who I knew was with me, but I didn't have space to know or learn about. I knew he was eternal, and though he had saved me eternally years before, I was able to meet him in new ways. My senior year, I met my husband, and then Dean walked me down the aisle in my wedding. And when I was younger, dealing with the need to survive each day, God was the only thing that was consistent. There was nothing else consistent. And I didn't recognize that God was there until I turned back and looked and said, oh, that was you all along. But when I was in it, I could not see it. But now I see it plain as day. If I wouldn't have prayed that prayer or clung to God in the ways that I would have committed suicide decades ago. There's no way I would have continued to try and figure this life out. And the only reason I could is because God was before me. I just didn't recognize it. And though self-harm was my main coping mechanism for years and years, I know that God was with me every step of the way. And what I don't want anybody to see in this testimony is just the bad or the hard things, because we all have bad and hard things in all of our lives. That is not unique. But to see the faithfulness of God in all of it, from the family across the street, they didn't have to do that. To all of our friends in the trailer parks, to my step aunt and uncle who decided to very randomly take a rebellious teenager into their home, to my husband and my in-laws, those are all workings of the Holy Spirit. His moves have kept me safe and have loved me, and for me to be able to look back and only see the hard and dark would be disservice to the Lord. I can look back and see the one true good Father. And for the longest time, when I was in the darkest parts of my life, I clung to Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, and that may be something you've heard before, but it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. When my husband and I got married after we were done with college, we knew God was going to be the center of our lives and keeping God at the center of our marriage, but I was still coping. I was like, that happened, but it happened and it did not affect me at all. Life is great. I, for so long, was that girl. I did not want to be that woman. Instead of self-harm, I wanted to make sure everything was in my control. Nothing bad could happen if I controlled it all. Our jobs, our finances, everything. It took us 7 years of marriage before I truly trusted my husband, not because he has ever done anything to make me not trust him, because I was sure in the back of my mind and in my heart that at some point he was going to leave. He's the biggest blessing that God's ever given me. And when we had children, I saw some of those trauma responses happen again. We have 3 kids, 14, 11, and 9. Buying an abundance of groceries, wasting and throwing away food because I never wanted my kids to ever be hungry. I didn't want them to even think that hungry was a thing. There's a whole lot with that, guys. I wanted them to have everything they needed, everything we wanted. And we know that's not healthy for children either. Working on my own parts of my story, owning my parts, my attitudes, the things that I did to my brother's parents was a process. I had to take a hard look at my own choices. And I'm thankful to have come to a place of forgiveness, and my children love them as grandparents who were able to make amends, and now they have bonus grandparents. But if we wouldn't have done the work to make the amends, to ask for forgiveness, we wouldn't have that. Unfortunately, my mom died 15 years ago when I was pregnant with our first son. After we were taken away, she was in and out of jail because of her addiction, and eventually she died alone in an apartment in Tennessee. And I've forgiven her for her parts of the story as well. She was the product of generational and cyclical abuse. She accepted Christ in her heart when she was in Ottawa County Jail, and that gives me great peace. I've forgiven my stepfather for the things that he did to our family, though I still struggle with fear of him. Every now and then I'll see him in the community and you feel it. Your heart beats really fast, my face gets red, but it doesn't have a grip on me. I can take that moment, I can bring it to the Lord, and then I walk away. It doesn't haunt me like it used to. I know that God has me in the palm of his hand. I know that he sees me in all of the situations that I am in. And like I said, if I'm honest, it's not instant peace, right? Trauma is trauma, and we can find healing from that. But sometimes there's still that little bit that's still there. Even as I wrote this testimony, for the record, I shared this for the first time 2 years ago. Nobody knew any of this, and that is the way I preferred it. Because again, I had been that girl. I did not want that to follow me. But that was not doing service to what the Lord had done in my life. So even as I wrote this 2 years ago, I felt feelings I hadn't felt in a very long time. When meeting with my mentor, she said to me, trauma's like a mountain road. You go back up and down the road where you traveled before, but what once was a mountain is now just a little rock you can step over. Sadness, fear, bumps, potholes are still there, but you can heal and cope with them differently. You want to see ahead. You want to know that it's not going to happen again, but what you have to do is trust God in it. Look back down that long road and look at all of those bumps. Look at all of the holes. Look at all of the hurts, the traumas, the hurts, the habits, the hang-ups, and see God's faithfulness in it. And then you can expect every dark turn, you know God is going to be there. Right? Exactly. So what's my life like? Well, by every statistic, standard, study, I should not be celebrating my 17th wedding anniversary. I shouldn't be a healthy parent and have 3 healthy children. I certainly shouldn't be standing in front of you. I shouldn't serve on a staff at a church. So many people in my life said I would never amount to anything. More recently, someone accidentally in my family sent me a text. And I had spoke somewhere, I had sent this teaching out that I did, and I was really proud of it, so I was sharing it with our people. And her text accidentally came to me and it said, not too bad for a girl whose mom walked out on her. I was like, okay, it's still there. But by the grace of the good Father, a lot of determination and hard work, I broke the cycle, and you can too. Determination that my kids were not going to grow up in a home with alcoholics and addicts, that my kids would sleep soundly, they would never have to call 911 because their dad was hurting their mom. About 7 years ago, our family walked through a very difficult, dark time. And in that moment, I wasn't sure I was going to ever get out of that pit, ever. I couldn't find forgiveness. I would walk into church, I would sit in the pew, and there was a wall between me and the Lord. I could not get through it. It was so isolating. And I didn't know what to do. And one night when I was weeping over my Bible, because that's the only thing I knew to do, the only thing that could heal my heart and soul was the Lord, relying on him, and then offering forgiveness to the person who did wrong to our family. And forgiveness wasn't about that person in that moment. It was about my healing. I wasn't going to be right with the Lord until I was able to offer forgiveness that did not excuse or discount the wrong that had been done, but it was a step in my healing. through that process. If you hear and remember only one thing, let it be this. You can do it. You can break the cycle with the help of God. You don't have to stay stuck in your hurt, your habit, or hang up. Don't quit. You'll fall, you'll trip, you'll turn around, you'll do all the things. But there's an unlimited amount of grace, just like that song we first sang. Always, that never leaves. Look up. God is there, cheering you on, giving you his hand, so you can stand up and try again. Do not stop trying. You will someday peek in the rearview mirror and see in the midst of the darkness and hard, you will see so much light of God's faithfulness. And even as I still stand here sharing this with you, sadness still creeps in. Of course, I would have loved my mom to know her grandchildren, right? I would have loved all of those things. And that's okay to feel sadness and loss. But it's bringing me back to those spaces of feeling unsafe. But now I can look in those dark places and feel brighter and lighter and safe because I know God is consistent and his light is bright. Scripture I would love to leave with you today is Psalm 66, 5 and 6. Come and see what God has done. He is awesome in his deeds toward his children of man. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed the river on foot. There we did rejoice in him. Thank you for letting me share.